Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to talk with you tonight.
Wonderful. And you sent your information about your book, Concealed by the Tide, that we will talk about a little bit later, and it is showing up here to the right of me. In fact, I'm going to just do a quick check and make sure that it looks good here. Yep, I see it on Twitch, and I see it on YouTube. So, yeah, it looks great on both venues. Why don't we start by telling our listeners and our viewers just a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I've been writing for a very long time. I was originally a writer of nonfiction. I wrote college textbooks and academic articles and educational materials. So I have a long background in writing, but when I retired, I decided I wanted to write fiction. So that was a discovery to me that writing fiction is very different from writing nonfiction. Not the same thing at all. And I kind of had to relearn how to write in a totally different way. I mean, when you write nonfiction, it's very much you do this, you do that, this is what's next, so this is a fact. When you write fiction, you have to get inside your characters. You have to become your characters. And you also have to come up with a story for them to be in or listen to the story they want to tell you. So I've been writing fiction now since 2012. So I guess that's what I'll start with. Now you can ask me what nano has to do with it.
That is exactly where I was going. So, um, my first thought question is, how long have you been doing nano?
Okay, well, what happened was I realized I didn't know anything about writing fiction, even though I thought I was a professional writer. I got paid for what I wrote. But I realized I needed to study, so I went and took workshops and courses. Because I learned I was a teacher. I know that the way to learn something is to get somebody else who knows it to tell you what to do. And I was doing that. I wrote my first novel, and I don't think it was, well, it was good in some ways, but not others. It was very long. It was like 150,000 words to start with. So I started joining writers groups, and I heard about this thing called NaNo, National Writing Month, or whatever it's called. And the groups were having sessions. They would hold, sessions within the group. And so I thought, oh, I'll try this, because it was a way to meet people. It was lots of fun. So I joined a group with savvy authors. They had a very active group. I had been taking workshops there. And then I also grouped at the same time, I joined a local group that had a really gung-ho group of people who really were very encouraging. So this was my first experience. And as I said, I had something in my background because having written nonfiction, I had learned to write to deadlines. So it didn't scare me to have to write 50,000 words in a month because I had been given things like write a chapter in 2 days. So it wasn't as scary as it might be to other people, but at the same time, I didn't really know what I was doing. Okay, because I didn't really know how to write fiction. So I joined those two groups, and that was in 2014. I actually went and looked it up. So my first nano was 2014. That was a long time ago. And I wrote my 50,000 words. I wrote a romantic suspense. I kind of made it up out of, well, I had done some research. I had a sort of plot, sort of, and I started just writing. And I wrote it. I realized it was far from finished. It was 50,000 words. It's not a finished novel. I hadn't finished, gotten to the end. So then I worked on it probably 6, 7 more months to finish it. And I went and I pitched it to Wild Rose Press. And Wild Rose Press said, yes, we'll take it. And I was like floored. I was like, really? So that was my first published novel. And it was called Beneath the Skin. and this is it. Okay, so that's what it looked like. It was set in New York City, and I was trying to feature unusual characters and people that aren't normally in fiction. So it's a story about street kids, graffiti kids who go around doing graffiti. Williamsburg, Brooklyn is famous for its graffiti. I was born in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, so I had a little extra motivation. And I had a grand time writing it. I had an anthropologist because my husband's an anthropologist, so I had an anthropologist in it. And I had a kidnapping because, I didn't know that in romantic suspense somebody had to die, so nobody dies in the book. Anyway, so I had a lot of fun. And so the next time Nano came around, I said, I'll do this again, right? It worked the first time. So I did. I wrote another one. So I wrote a series of 4. So I wrote one, let's see, I think I wrote that here. So 2014 to 2023, I've done 7 Nanos. So I've done 7, and I've written 7 books. Now they're not all published. The four for Wild Rose Press were published, and I just published this one, which was last year's Nano. I think it was 2020. I was actually thinking about it. Yeah, I didn't do it for 2 years. During the COVID years, I didn't do Nano. So this is the book I just published, and this was written during Nano as well. But I learned a lot. I wouldn't be writing all those books during Nano if I hadn't learned a lot the first time I did Nano. So, I don't know if you want to continue talking about Nano.
Oh, definitely. I was just thinking you've checked all the boxes that I encourage people to do. Start where you wrote in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, there where put in things that that you're sure you can do some research. You've got the anthropologist that I'm sure you know very well, and
Yes.
and you've got the local group and the online group, and Savvy Authors is wonderful. I taught for them probably about 10 years ago. It's been a while, but they are an excellent resource, an excellent group, and I loved, when I lived in a bigger city, I loved the local write-ins. The energy is just amazing if you've never been to one. So, and it sounds like you had fun at yours. So no, I was just thinking you checked all the good Nano boxes.
No, really. I'm teaching at Savvy Authors now. I went from taking every one of their courses to now teaching there, which is like, that's such a good feeling. I grew so much as a writer. Anyway, so what I learned about Nano was, the first thing it did is it taught me not to go back, because that was my big problem. I would keep going back and fixing things. I wanted it to be perfect. And you can't do that in fiction. It's okay in nonfiction. You can kind of do that, because it's, at least I could do it in nonfiction. But you can't do that in fiction, because you need that flow of the story and the emotion and the characters. And if you keep going back, you lose the emotional ties to the characters. Dialogue gets stilted, everything just stops. So the first thing I learned is I put this little mantra in my head the whole time I'm doing it, and I keep saying, only forward, never back. And so when I sit down to write, I only look at the last paragraph and take off from there. I don't even worry about anything. Just I don't go back. I never go back and look until I'm all done. I'm always amazed, because it's actually so much better than I thought it would be, because it has that emotional part in it that I don't know where it comes from. It's like you're in the story. So that's the first thing I learned in Nano, and it cured me from writing, from the nonfiction writing, which was kind of plodding stuff. You put this in. I used to have cards, and I have to put these, put them in order, and then I would write headings, and how, like a textbook. How textbooks read? They're not exactly exciting reading. So I wrote 3 textbooks. So I should tell you the story of my first textbook. Okay, I was a teacher, and I was teaching in college. I was teaching this course, and I'm using this textbook, and the students hated it. And and they told me that. I said, well, draw a picture of the author of this book, because it was a book it was about teaching children. So they drew this horrible picture of this guy, you know. And I thought, yeah, he does seem like a horrible man, and he should be writing this book. And then suddenly I get a phone call from the publisher of the textbook asking me, how do you like our textbook? And I said to him, I don't. And my students don't. They drew ugly pictures of the author. And he said, do you think you could write a better one? I thought, probably. So I did. I wrote a chapter. I had no idea how he did this. So I wrote this chapter. I took it to Kinko's. Do you remember Kinko's?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I took it to Kinko's, and I had to put a cover on it, and I had to bind it with a binder kind of thing. And I sent him this little book. I illustrated it with little illustrations, pasted them in, and sent it to him. And he calls me up laughing. He says, nobody's ever sent me a little book before. He just laughed and laughed. He says, I'll send it out and see what kind of feedback we get. And I guess he got good enough feedback because he gave me a contract. And he said, I'll give you 12 months to write this book. 12 chapters. It was 12 chapter book, textbook. And I said, I have no idea. I've never written that. I have no idea how you write a textbook. So I said, sure, why not? So I get to the end of 12 months. I only have 9 chapters done. So I call him up and I said, I only have 9 chapters done. I guess this isn't going to work. And he laughed. He said, nobody writes a textbook in 12 months. I wanted to see you try. So it took me longer. It took me 2 years to write the textbook.
Yeah, I can visualize everything that you're saying there with that. We were talking before the show. I'm in college, and so yes, I have been reading a lot of textbooks, and some of them. One of the things I've really noticed is some of the authors have a really good grasp of being able to tell an engaging story, even though you're talking about very dry topics. And some of the textbooks, it's just like, here, do you have insomnia? This will cure it for you. Yeah. And I think a lot of it too depends on the people's passion for the topic, because like a lot of the ones that I've been reading deal with some archaeological digs and discoveries and that, and it's just, they read completely different from my psychology textbooks. Yeah.
So my book was very successful. It's still in print. Went through 6 editions.
Wow.
So textbooks. I mean, if you write a textbook, it pays well. It does pay well, and I don't think mine's dry because mine's more of a how-to. It's a teaching book. It has lots of examples, but the problem that you run into is they tell you have to have these headings. It has to have this question. I had to have multiple choice questions. I could tell them this isn't a book you need multiple choice questions for, but I had to write multiple choice questions for the book. That kind of thing. So in some ways it was very frustrating. And fiction is very freeing because the far more openness, and in some ways that's a problem too, because it's so open that you may not know what direction you want to go. So I do believe in outlining for fiction, but nothing major. I don't do a big heavy outline. I just kind of put the major plot points that I want to hit at certain points, and I actually when I start writing for Nano, I go through, I put my chapter numbers in, I put where those plot points are supposed to come percentage-wise, and then I just write. So there's a kind of guideline, but I can move around. And it's nice. It's nice to have that.
It is nice. And romance, I used to write romance. I don't write it much anymore, but when romance is nice because it has established beats. It doesn't matter, I used to write paranormal romance, and you write, thrillers. I wrote a couple romantic suspenses. I was very weak though on the mystery suspense part. That's something I want to work on. But with romance, there's established expectations. Readers are going into it, and there's that moment when your two leads meet, and that that tension, and then there's depending on which direction you're going into as far as how does the relation progress physically. But romance is nice because it has those beats, and then you can do that kind of outline and that percentage and where you want to get to, and kind of match up with those beats in your head. And I just found a lovely rhythm to that. Is that something that you found too?
Yes, that's definitely something I found, but I didn't know that in the beginning. So my first series, they're not quite typical romances. I call them romantic thrillers because they don't really fit. As I said, I didn't have people dying, and you're supposed to have. I mean, I did once. I learned that you had to have a dead body somewhere in it. I did that in the next books, but I didn't. I really didn't know. I didn't know the genre. I had read it, but I hadn't. When I read a book, I get into the book. It become I just become part of the book. I don't think about the writing. So I hadn't analyzed how they were. So that was something that I found. I don't know if you know the book "Romancing the Beat" by Gwen Hayes.
Mm-hmm.
That's an excellent book if you're looking for what's expected in a romance. I found that very helpful.
Yeah, that came out well into my career, but even a seasoned author, I found that very, very interesting and very intriguing to think about as well. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your book, Concealed by the Tide. I, was looking at it and, reading through the blurb and everything as I was, of course, putting it on the website. And the first thing that jumped out at me was that these are unique characters with unique jobs, and it just immediately hooked me.
Yeah, as I said, I try to write about people that aren't normally written about. And again, I did bring my own personal experience to it. The heroine is an activist, and she's going to try to stop the tidal turbines, which everybody tells me they have no idea what that is, but it's a propeller type thing they put on the bottom of the ocean that turns with the tide and produces electricity, actually a lot of electricity. And so she's going to stop this because she thinks it kills marine life. So she's very, very dedicated and to that. And she has a backstory that I think came out of my own experience, because when I retired, one of the first things that happened is they wanted to put fracking in all around I live on a farm, and they wanted to put fracking all around my farm. And so I thought this would ruin our waters, which it's been shown to do. So I joined protests against fracking and spoke against fracking. And I made her background to be one where her family had fought against fracking as well. So I brought my experience to that.
Nice.
And then the hero is a marine biologist, but he's also a recently divorced man who has an autistic daughter that he's trying to figure out how to handle, how to take care of. And I worked with many, many children with autism, so I brought my experience to that as well.
Good. Well, and it releases tomorrow, correct?
Yes, tomorrow is the release day. I'm really excited about that. I love my cover because it has that kind of wondering, but also a little bit of worry. Something's going to happen. It has that feeling to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was happy with that. And there was something else I was going to say about. Oh, never mind.
And this was your
So
nano
that's
book.
coming out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So that book will be part of the series. It's set in Nova Scotia. I have a cottage in Nova Scotia, and we've been going there my husband's going there almost his whole life, but I've been going there. Well, in 2012, we bought a cottage when I retired in Nova Scotia. So we've been going there, have many friends, and there aren't many books set in Nova Scotia. So I thought this would be an interesting place that would also introduce people to a new environment. And the tides in that area are the highest in the world. They go like 65 feet.
Oh,
It's
wow.
quite amazing. Yeah. So people can actually get caught by the tides. That's that kind of place, against cliffs and stuff. So I use that in the book, and each of the other books will also be set in the same. It's an imaginary kind of composite Nova Scotia town I called it Tide Harbor. It's a small town, so it has a small town vibe. Everybody knows everybody, and the same characters will be appearing in each book. Not necessarily the same heroine and hero, but the town is the same, and the environment is the same. So the next book, which will be coming out shortly after this, is a set with fish ponds. It's about a salmon farming. It's about raising salmon in the pens, and it's about the pollution that causes.
Interesting. So, will all the books in the series have an ecological theme?
Sort of. The third book, which the second book is almost done. I'm just editing it. The third book is based on a true story about a tractor trailer of lobsters that was stolen. And I didn't know this, but a tractor trailer of lobsters is worth $1 million.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't know this. It's a true story that this truck was stolen. So I've imagined my character being the one who was supposed to be watching the trucks, and the truck is stolen out from under his nose, and everybody's making fun of him. They say he can't count, and so on. So he decides he's going to go off and find this missing truck.
Interesting.
So he teams up with the journalist, and they have some very hairy adventures.
Interesting.
So that's the next one. And then the next one after that will be about raising sea cucumbers, which is, I don't know if you know this, but it's very popular in Asia. So they have all these sea cucumber farms in Nova Scotia. And they have their issues too.
I imagine so. Yeah, I've only been to the ocean once, so other than what I see on documentaries, I don't know a lot about it, but it sure sounds interesting.
Yeah, well, again, books are a way to travel to places that you have never been or might never go. I mean, all my life I've traveled in books. Because I didn't go very much until I married my husband, and we were in the museum. He was a history major. And I said to him, if you're a history major, you'll spend your life in the library. Why don't you become an anthropologist and maybe we'll go somewhere? And so he did.
Great. Well, let's talk a little bit about this book's journey from nano to publication, because
yes,
you said you'd written it in 2020, and then of course COVID happened and upended everything. And so talk a little bit about your process, because it sounds like there was a little bit of time there.
Well, that's because I wrote several other books in between. I wrote a series of how-to books, because nonfiction is easy. So I wrote a book called Fast Draft, which is based on what I learned on Nano. It's a really short, little tiny book, and it has all the little things I learned. For example, I have the always forward, never back, but I also learned that affirmations are really important. Every morning before when I sit down to write, I always say to myself, I'll take my time and I can do the words today. I did it yesterday, I can do it again today. So that little bit of affirmation is really important for keeping you motivated. That's internal motivation. Then you can get all your groups of people and you can be motivated. One of my groups right now adds up everybody's word totals, and they try to reach the highest total they can. So, so it's not individual, it's like a team. And that's good too. The other thing I have in here that I think is really important is I call it dream on it, and every night before I go to bed, I dream the next part of my story. I just think about it, imagine it in my head, and go to sleep on that. And somehow it stays there until I'm ready to write the next day. And then I don't have to think about it. It just kind of comes out. So I call that dream runner. So anyway, so this is a little tiny book. I wrote this book. And then I wrote this book, which is How to Revise It, which is a little bit thicker. And I just taught a course on this on Savvy Author, because what you come out of from Nano is a really rough, sloppy draft.
Yes.
So this is the book that tells you how to put it together into something that sounds like a finished novel, manuscript, so that by the time you're done, you're ready to have it edited, because revision's not the same as editing, even though we use those two words as synonyms. They're not. Revising is making sure those plot points are in the right spot, making sure that the transitions and the hooks and all those things are working together to make the story work. So those two, and then I wrote two more in the series, and these were published by Fused Published, because in nonfiction, it's totally different than fiction. In nonfiction, you write a proposal and you send it to an editor, and they then tell you, yes, well, I'll publish those books. So I hadn't even written the book, and I had a contract to write them, because I had that nonfiction background, so probably helped. Anyway, so there's two more. There's one on doing research, which is also all about plagiarism, how not to get sued. How don't put Disney in your book, for example, because Disney doesn't want that. We had a poor farmer here who had a Snoopy painted on the roof of his barn. It was there forever. And Disney actually came to this little farm, this little farmer, and made him paint it over. Because he had this Snoopy or whatever it was, some Disney character. Anyway, and then the last one is called Paralanguage. It's the one you would use last. It's all about how to make your prose really pop. So that's what I was doing in between writing this book. So what's the process on this? Well, first you have to finish the rest of the book, because 50,000 words is not really a novel. It should be 75, somewhere in there, 70, 75 for a standard romance anyway. I know fantasy and paranormal can be longer. So you finish writing it, and then you have to do the revision, and then you have to. I have it professionally edited, but even that's not perfect. So I also run it through Pro Writing Aid. Are you familiar with them?
Yeah, I am not a fan. I find that unless you know, which I'm sure you do, but unless you know the grammar rules to start with, Pro Writing Aid or Grammarly or even Microsoft Word's editor, they take everything in isolation. So they take each word in isolation or each sentence in isolation. And so I have actually, if I didn't know the grammar rules, I've actually had the Pro Writing Aid want to introduce errors.
Oh, I was going to say that.
Yeah.
I use it as a fact. I actually do it after I'm a professional editor, just because even professional editors can miss a period, or they can miss a quotation mark. I've had that happen. Or run on words, because what happens is when you do it with an editor, they send you track changes, and it comes back, and sometimes you lose a space. And then it finds that. So that's why I do it after the professional editor. So that's kind of, because then I know the professional editors already checked those other things that you were talking about. So that's a little hint that I do. So, but Pro Writing, I was going to say, I haven't tried it yet, but they have a new one now. It's supposed to be all AI help. I don't have any idea how that works. I'm not really into the AI stuff, because the suggestions usually are pretty bad, the ones I've tried. They've been giving out free trials of things.
Definitely. Well, we're coming to the end of the show. I just want to remind our listeners and viewers that they can head out to our website, musecharmer.com, and sign up for our newsletter, be alerted to new shows. Also, they can watch all the replays on YouTube at youtube.com/ at Epona Author Solutions. Sorry, I'm trying to keep the cat away from the the camera here. But before we go, I just want to give you an opportunity to let our listeners and viewers know where they can find out more about you and your work, and of course all those links are also in our show notes.
Okay, well, mainly I have a very active website. It's called ZaraWestRomance.com. Very easy. And I do author interviews. I do one author interview every month. And I do book reviews, not as much as I should. I write books reviews on Goodreads and Amazon, but I don't always transfer them to my website. But I do try to do book reviews. And it hooks up to my Zara West journal, which is the writing craft site. So if you want more about very, I do very simple, short little directions on things that I like. I make a lot of charts and tables that you can fill in and help you think of things, and you'll find them there. So but the link is there. It's Zara's journal is what it's called.
Great, great. Well, again, in case anybody's driving or not able to write those down, all of those are in the show notes. I'm just going to do a quick check here, make sure, see if we have any questions or anything. I am not seeing any out there, so I do want to really thank you for taking time to talk to us about your books and your writing and your experience. I've really enjoyed having this time to talk with you. And I hope all of our listeners and viewers check out your book. I admit, I grabbed my copy as I was setting up the blog. I thought, well, this sounds like a good relief from reading all those textbooks. So I went ahead and picked up a copy myself.
And I should point out it's a clean romance too.
Okay, good. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Nothing against the steamier stuff, but
No, I'm not against it either. My other books are steamier, but I don't know. I just this one just felt softer.
sometimes the characters dictate that for you, I think.
Yes. Yes.
Yep. Well, I just want to close out our show here, and again, thank you so much for being here, and thank everybody for listening to Write Talk Wednesday